And I want to start by, first and foremost, thanking Chaim Miller, who was, I know, on demand and on tour, and yet, especially as we approach in exactly 1 week, the 20th anniversary of the Rebbe's passing. And anybody who had anything to do or connect with the Rebbe is on demand to speak. I'm not a writer and I'm not a biographer, and yet I got calls from younger shluchim, colleagues, since I had this chus to spend time in 770 in the good days, to come and talk with them and so on, to describe to them a little bit about what life was like in the Rebbe's presence. So it's a tremendous chus for us to have Reb Chaim here. I want to thank Adam and Ricky Fishbein for encouraging this event and helping make it happen. And for Aaron using his negotiating skills to negotiate time in Reb Chaim's calendar to make Reb Chaim available here. Now, you know, in times such as Gimel Tammuz, reflecting on the Rebbe's life is definitely an opportune time to go over to the Yohel, the Rebbe's graveside, even if it's just for 30 seconds at 3 in the morning. That may be the time you'll get, but nevertheless, it is the auspicious time of the year to connect with the tzaddik. It's always a great time, but how much more so on the Rebbe's anniversary. We're around the corner. I spoke to a Chabad colleague who's bringing in a group from South Africa. They're landing Monday evening and returning on Wednesday. They're just coming in for the 36 hours of Monday night to Wednesday morning, and then they're off back to South Africa for the day. How much more so when we're around the corner, we should definitely utilize that time, quality time, to be there, b'smichus and close to the Yohel, and be spending time at the Yohel. There's also going to be a great program on Sunday. If you can make it to Queens College, you can go on to soulencounters.com and make your reservation. A great day filled with lecturers, speakers, where one can reflect and learn so much about the Rebbe, his life, his teachings. Now, Reb Chaim will be available following our program for a book signing for those who have not yet gotten his book signed, and for that matter, more than the book signing, break the binding, use it, read it, and learn from it. There's so much we can learn. We will have a short video of the Rebbe following the speech before the book signing. And there's many reasons why I chose specifically. I was after Reb Chaim, even though there's, you can say, good competition in our business, in Chabad and Rebbe. Competition is good for business, where you have Rabbi Telushkin's book, you have Rabbi Steinsaltz's book, and they're all great. But for me personally, and for our Chabad house, to me Reb Chaim Miller means more than the biography. I don't know him, and he didn't become popular by this biography. Reb Chaim Miller found tremendous strength, wisdom, and relevance in the Rebbe's teachings to every single Jew, and for that matter to every person. And he made the Rebbe's teachings available and accessible to all, to thousands. It has become the official Chabad house gift here for every bar and bar mitzvah. They get a good Chumash, which the commentary, and the Rebbe's commentary, was written by Reb Chaim Miller. Reb Chaim has the tremendous wisdom and power to take a message that the Rebbe can speak about 10, 15, 20 pages of book space, and to sum it up and not to lose its juice in 4 or 5 lines. It's a tremendous power, and I must say the appreciation comes more than the biography. The biography is great, but the Rebbe's teachings. We know we're taught in Chassidus that there's nothing more powerful than wisdom connecting with wisdom, and our intellect connecting with the intellect of Torah through the Rebbe's vision. Chassidus explains that the first of the 10 commandments of the Aseret HaDibros begins with the word Anoichi. And the Gemara says in the Masechta Shabbos that Anoichi is an acronym, Ano Nafshi, I myself, Ksovis, wrote Torah, Yehovis, I gave it to you. And Chassidus explains another translation that Ano, I, Nafshi, my soul, my essence, Ksovis, that's what a tzaddik writes, that's the commentary, and that's Yehovis, that's what he gives. As we find by the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, that before his passing, he mentioned, Ich geh, I'm going ascending to greater heights, but I'm leaving you my writings. So even though the Rebbe is not physically with us, but we can find the Rebbe and relate to the Rebbe's vision, legacy, understanding, message through his teachings. So yes, we're grateful to have Reb Chaim here tonight for the biography, but I do highly recommend that in addition to the biography, please take a moment, take your time to get the Chumash, get the Haggadah, whether it's Nusach Ashkenaz or Nusach Ari, get the Tehillim of the commentary, get the Rambam, the 8th principle, and study it. It's tremendous. It is really tremendous. At this time, without further ado, Reb Chaim Miller.
I've been doing this for almost a decade now, and it's hard to fathom why people are so impressed by authors. It's a really tough profession being an author. You spend most of your days below the ground, chained to your laptop, and it's such a great pleasure, after years of working on a book, to meet some of the people who are reading it, who are interested in it, and I thank you so much for coming out tonight to massage and comfort the soul of a lonely author. They tell a story about an author who passed away, went to the gates of heaven, and I always imagine the gates of heaven rather like checking in for a flight. You don't know quite where you're going to be sitting. And he's standing there at the gates of heaven, and they say to him, your papers are in question, we're not sure whether you're going to go to writer's Gan Eden, writer's heaven, or writer's Gehinnom, writer's purgatory. In Judaism we don't call it hell. So they said, well, while you're waiting, just go and check both out if you like. So he goes to writer's purgatory. He thinks, well, let's just fear for the worst. And he goes in there, a horrible scene. He sees thousands of authors, and they're chained to their desks, and they're sweating away, typing on their laptops. Very, very hot, very unpleasant. He thinks, oh, I don't want to go there. It reminds me of my life too much. So he goes down to heaven, and he goes into writer's heaven, and he's shocked. He sees exactly the same thing. Thousands of writers, they're all chained to their desks, and they're all tapping away on their laptops. So he goes back to the gates of heaven, and he says to the angel, what's going on here? I went to writer's Gehenna, I went to writer's Gan Eden. It's the same thing. What's the difference in writer's Gan Eden? And the angel replies, over there they get published. So it's been a great, great privilege to have here some heaven on earth and be published, and to write a biography of the Rebbe, the great Lubavitch Rebbe of Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory, who was such a wonderful figure and such an inspirational figure to so many Jews. To write his life, to write the story of his life is humbling, and is actually an impossible feat, which I believe is why so many writers resisted that urge for so many years to write about him, because he simply cannot be captured in a book. And it's very hard to write about the Rebbe's life in a way that those who knew him, those who loved him, can relate to. I heard from Rabbi Aaron Rekefet, who wrote the biography of Rabbi Soloveitchik, the late great Rav of Yeshiva University, and he told me that when you write a biography, if you do a good job, people will like it. There's one group of people who will never like a biography, and that's the family of the person. The family is always going to say, well, you didn't quite get it right. The problem in Chabad is we're all the Rebbe's family. We're dealing with a family all over the world of hundreds of thousands of people. So it's been a very, very great challenge, and the work is an inadequate one. It's an impossible feat to try and capture the Rebbe, but I have gone through his life year by year and just documented, written down the facts that we know that are historically correct of the details of his life. And even though I try to be a Chabad Chassid and I educate my children in the ways of Chabad, and I've dedicated my life to teachings of the Rebbe and spreading the teachings of the Rebbe, I have changed through writing the book, and it's really made a very indelible impression on me, the Rebbe's life. And I'd like to share a few reflections with you about that. The saddest part, of course, of the book is the end, the Rebbe's passing, which we're coming up this year, Gimel Tammuz, the 1st of July, will be 20 years, a momentous date, 20 years since the Rebbe's passing. The Rebbe passed away Motzei Shabbos. He actually had a cardiac arrest at 7 p.m. Motzei Shabbos Parshas Korach on the 2nd of Tammuz. And the doctors were able to revive him. And he had another cardiac arrest, 12:55 a.m. In other words, past midnight. And after that, attempts were made to revive him, and he eventually passed away a short while later. And when you read that, you wonder what was going on in heaven. There seems to be this heavenly tug on the Rebbe's soul. Is his yahrzeit going to be the 2nd of Tammuz, as it almost was? And he just about made it to the 3rd of Tammuz. It seems so important to the memory of the Rebbe and the legacy of the Rebbe that Gimel Tammuz would be the date of his histalkus. Why is that? Why was that so important? I'd like to leave that question with you as we reflect on the content of his life. Maybe we'll revisit it at the end and I'll suggest an answer. Chabad, in the 20 years since the Rebbe's passing, has exploded in impact. In the Rebbe's lifetime, it was a hugely influential movement. Since his passing, when many feared that the movement would fall apart without his centralized, powerful, charismatic leadership, to everyone's surprise, the movement has burst beyond all expectations. And it has also influenced possibly every Jewish community in the world, and possibly every other type of Judaism. Amazingly, 2003, the head of the Reform movement at the time, Eric Yoffe, stood up at the bicentennial celebration of Reform, and he said, you can read it, it's on the internet, it's documented, he said, I hate to say this, but we need to be more like Chabad. 2013, last year, a scholar wrote an article in an Oxford University journal. Sure, you know, coming from England, that means something to me. He wrote an article in an Oxford University journal describing the Chabadization of American Judaism. The author was Noah Lubavitcher. He's a scholar, and he documented facts, historical facts, how in the 60s, in the 50s, even in the early 70s, when the Rebbe was focusing so much on this idea of outreach, that we have to reach out to the non-affiliated, we have to reach out to our Jewish brothers and sisters who have not yet tasted from the living waters of Torah. That in its day was a controversial idea, and something which was either resisted or simply ignored, perhaps even opposed. But now, decades later, everyone is doing it. And in Lakewood it's popular, in Misnagdic circles it's popular, everyone wants to do Kiruv. This is part of the legacy of the Rebbe. And that is why I call the book Turning Judaism Outward. What is the greatest impact a person could desire? In England they have the saying, I don't know if it made it across the Atlantic, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. You say that here? Yeah. The whole world is obsessed with outreach, with kiruv, with reaching out. Today there are more, if you count Chabad and all the other kiruv rabbis and other movements, there are more outreach professionals than Reform, Conservative and all other forms of liberal Judaism put together. Turn back the clock to 1950, 1940, most people were saying Orthodoxy won't even survive in America. America's not fertile ground. So this was very much, hugely the influence of the Rebbe. The Rebbe had a phenomenal impact, not only amongst his own following, but amongst others. How did he do that? How? A lot of people crave influence. Many of us want to be famous or remembered for something. How do you swing Judaism around? From a country that was described as the Treifa Medina. America was called the unkosher country because of the 2 million immigrants who came here between 1880 and around the outbreak of the First World War. Almost none of them remained Orthodox in their affiliation. There was a huge hemorrhaging of Orthodox practice in America. How did that turn around to the point where Orthodoxy is so strong in America and everyone wants to do outreach? How did that happen? How did the Rebbe change the world? I'd like to suggest a few answers. Number one, hard work. The Rebbe, I challenge you, find me one human being. Let's not talk about rabbis now. Find me one human being who worked as hard as the Rebbe. A person that famously never took a vacation in 40 years of Rebbehood, over 40 years of leadership. A person that would arrive at his office in the morning, after the prayers, would be in his office until late at night. The Bocharim, the young yeshiva students who would sit outside his office until he went home, will tell you he left at 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. There were no limits to it. And he would take home a bag of papers, letters to read, sermons to edit. And in the morning he would come back, all the homework would be done. We don't know exactly how much he slept, but it was very, very little. He worked extremely hard. The number of people that he met. By 1965, according to the American Jewish Yearbook, he was seeing 1,500 people a year in private audience, private meetings. Anyone could see the Rebbe. You just had to, by then it was a little bit of a wait. He was willing to speak to anyone. He was willing to correspond with anyone. The New York Post Office said that by the 1980s, he received more mail than any other individual in New York City. And do you know why? Because he replied. When you reply to letters, you get letters. We have on file possibly close to 100,000 letters that the Rebbe wrote. Tens of thousands have been published already. Tens of thousands are waiting to be published. Tens of thousands will never be published because they're highly confidential. But simply to pen that amount of material, you add all that together. And the sichas, the sermons, the Rebbe would speak on Shabbos. As the years went by, the sermons became longer and longer. But those that were there in the 1980s will tell you on a Shabbos, on a summer afternoon, he would speak for 5, 6, sometimes 7 hours. The Rebbe is credited as the only rabbi who stopped his community speaking Lashon Hara on Shabbos, simply because they were sitting by the Farbrengen and weren't able to speak. That level of dedication, that level of drive, when no one was interested. I quote in the book, 1965, the Rebbe told privately to one of his close chassidim. You're talking about he's been Rebbe for 15 years. He said the only ones interested in what I have to say are the students, the Bocharim. No one else really interested. Now, how much that was just a frustration, to what extent that was literally true, I'm sure a lot of people were interested. But it just shows you something. Our image of the Rebbe, especially from the 1980s and the later years, is a man who could swing the universe, sway communities all over the world. I remember hearing a story, in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a program called Hanukkah Live. Chabad has always gone on the cutting edge of technology. And they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this huge truck outside 770, and there was live hookups via satellite, which in that day was cutting edge of Hanukkah celebrations around the world. And in television, there's such a thing called a vision mixer, which means you have a feed from all the different cameras. And the vision mixer chooses which image is going to be broadcast. And the vision mixer of this program was blown away. Because he said, I saw the Rebbe wave his hand in New York. He's looking at all the feeds at once. And as the one rabbi waves his hand in New York, in Moscow they're dancing, in Paris they're dancing, in Israel they're dancing, he could see the immediate impact globally of this one wave of the hand. The Rebbe was hugely influential. But in the 50s he wasn't. In the 60s he wasn't to the same extent. And he had that vision, he had that drive. Judaism has to go outwards, and I'm going to stay with this vision, with this mission statement, with absolute conviction. And I'm going to give it every ounce of energy that I have until my last day on this planet. My Rebbe Volovic mentioned by Steinsaltz's biography. He writes there something very interesting. And the last time he saw the Rebbe said to him, you have to take advantage of every moment you have. And on reflection, Rabbi Steinsaltz thought, maybe the Rebbe was talking about himself. Maybe the Rebbe was saying, to my last day, I'm going to give this everything I have. Because a lot of people ask the question, why didn't the Rebbe plan? He didn't appoint a successor. Didn't that go through his mind? Obviously it went through his mind. But what was he thinking? Every moment I have left, I'm going to teach more Torah. I'm going to inspire more people. And I'm going to be here to the last breath, to the last moment. And that is what has energized Chabad to carry on and to reach every corner of the globe and to inspire so many individuals of personal contact. And that is what inspires the Shluchim, those who, if anyone he could be given second place to the Rebbe as the hardest working people on earth, it's the Shluchim. Day and night. Day and night. There's not a moment the Shluchim are not caring for their communities and working for their communities. And that was the inspiration of the Rebbe's personal example. So number one is hard work. Laser dedication to vision. And not to be derailed by critics, to be derailed by cynics, and to be derailed by failure when things didn't work out. Number two. The attitude. Many have praised the Lubavitcher Rebbe for his non-judgmental love of every Jew. Famous story everyone tells about the Rebbe, which kind of sums it up. As you know, he stood by dollars from 1986 onwards. The Rebbe stood on a Sunday morning. He was in his mid to late 80s, and he stood for hours giving out dollars. Hours, thousands of dollars every Sunday, so people could, to stimulate mitzvah observance, so people could give to charity. And people would have the opportunities to speak to him. Do you know why he did that? Because his doctor had told him that it's not advisable to have private meetings anymore. Yechidas stopped, these all-night meetings. So instead, he stood up and, at the age of 85 and onwards, giving out dollars. There's one lady that came by and said to the Rebbe, how do you have the energy to stand so long and give out dollars to all these people? And the Rebbe said to her, instinctively and immediately, when you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired. So he had this great love for being profane or not sacred. And the Rebbe wrote back to her that you have 20 generations behind you. The only reason you're Jewish is because for 20 generations there have been Jews in your family, some of which probably risked their lives for Judaism. Okay, there might have been a lapse in the last couple of generations, but you are the total of those 20 generations. Don't just look at the last two. Look deeper. Scratch the surface and you'll find the root. Now you all know that. Everyone knows that the Rebbe's Avos Yisrael is legendary. I don't have to tell you about that. But the question I'd like to ask you is why? Why? Why did he love every Jew? Why did he come out with a position which is considered to be outstanding, unprecedented, of inclusiveness, that everyone belongs, and we should go and associate everyone with the Jewish people? Why did he love every Jew? Because he was a nice man? Because he was emotional? The Rebbe was not a happy, clappy, lovey-dovey type of person who knew the Rebbe. He wasn't this person that just gushed with emotion, gushed with love in a kind of very superficial way. By the Rebbe, Avos Yisrael was not just a feeling, it was a shita. It was a viewpoint, it was a position in Torah. I do not believe that the Rebbe embraced every Jew and loved every Jew just because he felt that way. The Rebbe, by his own admission, was not a man who lived in the world of feelings and events. I want to read to you a portion of a letter which I found very fascinating. Because to write a biography, you need a lot of personal material. You need diaries, you need correspondence, you need to interview people who were close with the individual. And writing about the Rebbe's life, that presented a tremendous challenge. You know why? Because there isn't any material. Despite the fact the Rebbe lived 92 years and he walked this planet, there's almost no written or personal materials about his inner world. And that's not because they've been covered up. They just don't exist. Because from 1941, when the day the Rebbe's foot hit American turf, he was so given over to the mission that he didn't have a personal life. He didn't hang out with friends. He didn't really correspond with anyone on a personal level. Because he gave his blood, he gave his life, he gave every last drop to the work of Chabad. But, very interestingly, in the last few years, the correspondence which the Rebbe had with his father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, blessed memory, has surfaced. And this is in the period after the Rebbe's marriage, until, which is at the end of the 1920s, throughout the 1930s when the Rebbe lived in Berlin and later in Paris, until the outbreak of World War II. So you have a very long period of correspondence, and a very insightful one. And if there's one part if you don't want to read the whole book, if there's one part you want to read, turn to those pages where you see those from the 1930s, where you see that correspondence. If you want a little bit of insight, the only insight we have into the Rebbe's inner world. I want to read you one passage, which when I read it, it blew me away. Because we don't have material like this. It's on page 99. It's a letter. Basically, what happened was that the previous Rebbe was a man of great, great emotion. By his gatherings, he would praise his chassidim, he would bestow love on them, and he was a great chronicler of his life's events. We have in excruciating detail almost everything that he did, from his childhood, his memories in Lubavitch, his interactions with people. He was a biographer, he was a historian, one of the most richest pens of any Chassidic Rebbe is Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. And his daughter, the Rebbe Chaim Miller, marries the Rebbe at the end of the 20s. And the sixth Rebbe, he's been thrown out of Russia by the Soviets, just managed to barely survive with his life. He's living in Riga, Latvia, which for him was, he was used to being at the center of Jewish life. It was more of a satellite community in terms of world Judaism. So he was trying to find his footing. He came to America, he visited Israel, eventually he settled in Poland, and the Rebbe went off to Berlin with his wife and began to study, eventually getting a degree in engineering for a profession. And they start to get to know each other by letters. And you can read this correspondence and it's absolutely fascinating, because it's the only little insight we have into the Rebbe's world. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, keeps writing, tell me more! Tell me how you feel after Tisha B'Av, after Yom Kippur. How did you fast? How did you feel? Tell me everything. Tell me about your inner world. Tell me about what's going on in your life. And the Frierdiker Rebbe fills pages and pages and pages of his own experience trying to get a response from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe doesn't write back very much. And the Frierdiker Rebbe eventually starts to, I won't say complain, but he expresses his frustration. Please write. I want to hear how you are. And then in a letter from the early 1930s, the Rebbe writes as follows. This is, of course, in translation into the Queen's English. The Rebbe writes, the reason why I have not written is due to the lack of interesting events to report. The Rebbe is sitting in Berlin, mixing. His teachers were some of the greatest Nobel Prize winners in the history of physics. Schrödinger, he was in Einstein's department of physics, although we don't know of any personal connection, but Einstein was the head of the department at the time. He's visiting Stieblach in Berlin. He's in one of the most exciting places in the world and one of the most fertile periods of the intellectual history of the human race. Meanwhile, he's writing, he's studying Chabad tracts, he's writing indexes to Chabad material. Nothing to report. Then he says as follows. There are people for whom the central, overwhelming focus of their lives is in the world of thought, the world of ideas, and their main activities are focused inwards to the world set in their hearts, and not to the outside world surrounding them. After this introduction, I must say that while I do not consider it to be a particular virtue, it seems that whether as a result of my natural disposition or outside influences, I am such a person. For as long as I can remember, there has been a paucity of interesting events in my life, things that I found personally engaging. The Rebbe lived through the pogroms. He lived through the Bolshevik Revolution. He went into hiding in Russia because he was under surveillance from the Soviets. He was in Berlin in the Renaissance period of physics. He was in Paris when the Nazis invaded. And finally, he came, and that was after that letter was written, and he came to New York, and he had one of the most interesting lives. And he said, my life, there's nothing really interesting to report. I live in the world of ideas. And what the Rebbe was really saying is, for me, Torah is reality. Whatever it says in Torah, that for me is truth. The outside doesn't always seem to fit with what it says in Torah. One day it will. And that's why I believe he had so much emphasis on the coming of Mashiach, and the belief in Mashiach was because that's the time when the outside world and the books, the Torah, are going to be in perfect alignment. And the Rebbe inhabited this world of ideas, and he really believed in them. He really believed in what it said in Torah. So when it says, Afal pi shachata Yisrael, when it says even though a Jew sins, he or she remains a Jew, he believed it. When it said in the Zohar, Yisrael le'raisa v'kuchabricha kulachan, that a Jew, God, and the Torah is really one thing, which means you cut the veins of a Jew, Torah will come out. You scrape the surface, a Jew wants Torah. When the Rambam writes famously that every Jew wants to keep Torah mitzvahs, you just need to rub them the right way. He believed it. He took that as literal truth, and he dedicated his life to it. And it took many, many years to produce results. So I don't believe, when we say the Rebbe loved every Jew, it wasn't just an emotion. Of course there was that emotional part to it. He did love. You see the beautiful pictures of him smiling at children and spending hours giving out dollars. He had the love. But it came from Torah. It came from truth. It came from values. And there's something even deeper. A third point, which I will... There's only three, you don't have to worry. A third point. Where did this come from? I mean, every Jew has read what it says in the Gemara, Afal pi shachata Yisrael. Everyone knows that. We all know that. What motivated the Rebbe to really believe it and dedicate his life to it? I want to share with you a few insights. First of all, Rabbi Herbert Wiener, Oliver Sholem, was a Reform rabbi. Eventually he embraced Shulchan Aruch, Tefillin, keeping Shabbos, through the influence of the Rebbe. I actually had the interesting schus of sitting in a Gemara shir with him. He used to come, when I was in Morristown in the late 1990s, Rabbi Vichner Oliver Sholem was the Rosh Hashiva in Morristown, was close to Rabbi Wiener, and he sat right next to me in the Gemara class. And he famously interviewed the Rebbe in the 1950s. It's one of the very few interviews the Rebbe conducted. And he wrote a book called 9.5 Mystics where he describes the interview. A lot of you have probably read it. And he asked the Rebbe, he said, I see the face of a lot of your followers. They look a little bit simplistic, they're a little bit naive, if you'll excuse me. And the Rebbe replied, do you know why? Because they are devoid of conflict. He says, when you live in two worlds, you're trying to balance the secular world with the Torah world, secular reality with Torah truth, you can end up with a schism, and you're living a schism. He called it a kara, a split. These boys, he said, don't have that, because they're just exposed to one world. Rabbi Wiener was very impressed. Another insight along the same line, you'll see I'm threading a pattern. Paul Rosenblum was a professor of math at the University of Minnesota, later in University of Columbia, and he became a Lubavitcher Chassid, a very close follower of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe told him in Yechidus, I write it in the book, he said, if you have in your home Torah books and secular books, and you put them, you hide away your secular books, or you put them on a different shelf, that's heresy. That's heresy. If you're allowed to own the books, if the books which are Torah you're allowed to own, then you'll find God in them also. Don't make this distinction that's not there. Another example. In the 1980s, the Rebbe gave a number of sermons, a number of lectures on this question whether the Rambam was a ish b'futzah, whether he had a split personality. As you're probably aware, the Rambam is one of the most loved Jews in the world. Orthodox Jews love him. Secular Jews love him. Zionists love him. Academics love him. But everyone sees him in a different light. And when the Rambam writes in the Guide for the Perplexed, in his more philosophical language, he seems like a different person to when he's writing in the Mishnah Torah, in his code of law, in a more halachic language. And the academics will always argue, really the Rambam was like he writes in the Guide. And when he was writing the Mishnah Torah, he had to behave more like a Fruma Yid, so he played that game. And Fruma Yid, and what do we say? No, forget. Really, the Rambam was a Fruma Yid, and he was a Maimin in the Yugen Likr. When it came to writing the Moreh Nevuchim for the Perplexed, he had to write in the language of the Perplexed. So that wasn't the real Rambam. The Rebbe said in a Sikha, Chas v'shalom to say the Rambam was ish b'futzal. Chas v'shalom to say there was any division. Both are genuine aspects of the Rambam. And the Rebbe even argued you could get the Guide for the Perplexed. You can understand the Mishnah Torah better through learning the Guide for the Perplexed. Now let me ask you something, whether you agree with that point or not. When we express our opinion, we usually say something about ourselves. I just wrote a book. It's a biography. Biographies are controversial. Everyone has their opinion about it. I get stopped in the street, people praise me, they kiss me. I get stopped in the street, I duck. There's different reactions. And I'm a very sensitive person. And I might not look it, but I am. And I get offended very easily. And one way I've learned to deal with criticism is to realize when people say something about you, they're really usually talking about themselves. You just happen to be the way they're expressing it, but they're really just talking about themselves. When the Rebbe was talking about the Rambam, he was talking about himself. To look at the Rambam and say, it's impossible for there to be a division between secular knowledge and Torah knowledge. It's impossible to have this compartmentalization that here, in business, we behave one way, and at home, we behave another way. When we're talking Chakira, Chachma, that we think one way, and when we learn Gemara, we learn another way. It's impossible to do that. Why? Because the Rebbe had that conviction. He believed that there's one God, and that God is everywhere, and He's in every part of wisdom, only to be found away. And that's why we find the most phenomenal thing. Rabbi Soloveitchik told his Talmidim, he said, Ich kann meid sein, I can testify. There's not one day that ever missed going to mikveh in Berlin. For a man to go to mikveh, it's an act of piety. It's not required. It's something you do out of extreme act of piety. Berlin was the center of culture. It was the center of secular wisdom. Sitting there in Berlin, the Rebbe went to mikveh because he believed there's no contradiction. And that is why I believe I could suggest the Derech Efshe that the Rebbe's neshama felt it so important that his histalkus would be on Gimel Tammuz, not Beis Tammuz. Why? What is Beis? What is two? Two means two worlds. There's a division, there's a split. There's secular Jews, there's religious Jews. There's secular wisdom, there's Torah wisdom. There's the godly and there's the non-godly. I remember there wasn't two worlds, there wasn't shtei reshuyos. He rejected that emphatically. He wanted to go from 2 to 3. What's 3? The third pasuk comes and shows a hachra, that there's really a connection. What you thought was a contradiction is not a contradiction. The second of Tammuz was Parshas Korach. What's Korach? Machlekes, division. What's Korach? It says that Korach was bald, his hair was separated. Why? Because that represents division. Vayikach Korach ve'ispaleg Korach, the Targum says. The Korach represented division. The Rebbe didn't want to be associated with that. The Rebbe says Takas Gemurus, which is Zois Chukas HaTorah. Everything's coming from Torah, even the Chukei HaTeva, even the laws of nature. That's Torah. Even the laws of physics, that's Torah. The laws of biology, that's Torah. Ayid, scratch below the surface, you'll find Torah. There is so, ladies and gentlemen, there's so much we can say about Lubavitcher Rebbe. His life is so interesting. But if you read the book, you will read more details about his life. But I just wanted to share with you, this is what I've learned from the book. And it's something which has eased my soul. Because, I'll just conclude with this thought. I grew up traditional in England, which is a nice way of saying not very religious. And about 20 years old, I got involved with Chabad, I got interested in Chabad, became much more observant. And I've always had this schism in my own personality. You know, when a person becomes a Baal Tshuva, there's the old you and the new you. And there's always that conflict between the old you and the new you. I always joke with, Baal Tshuva who are dating other Baal Tshuva, there's 4 people here. There's the old you. There's a lot of conversations going on. There could never be 2 yous, there's really the one you. And the old you is really the new you. And the not Torah you was really, you were really a Torah Jew then, you just have to scratch below the surface. And to avoid schism, to avoid contradiction, it's very healing, it's very cathartic. And I think that if we take that message, and on this awesome day of Gimel Tammuz, I encourage you all, of course, to visit the Oil, the Rebbe's resting place, a very, very sacred place where we can get a little bit of his spirit and be inspired to be better Jews, more consistent Jews, more knowledgeable Jews, and ultimately Chabad Jews. Not Chabad necessarily in the sense of all being affiliated to Chabad, but Chabad meaning the mind, that the mind controls the heart, and that the mind, Torah teaching, should always inform the way we think and the way we act. Thank you very much for listening. If anyone has a question or two, have a brief chance before the book signing. Yes?
How long did it take you to write the book?
Well, it took 2 years to write, but I've been collecting material for years, so. And I've been immersed in Chabad for 20 years. So. About 2 years. Yes?
I understand that it's roughly the 20th you said already, but what's so special about this time that 3 different biographies about the Rebbe came out, specifically not the new information
Okay, the question was, why did the 20th Yortzeit is special, but how comes 3 biographies came out at the same time? I mean, they were not done in coordination. I can only speak for myself that something, we all miss the Rebbe so much and try so hard to carry on his work, but there's something, daunting when it comes to a major event like a 20 years, and that is something which really motivated me. I know I have 7 children, many, there's a whole generation in Chabad that has grown up that didn't have the privilege to meet the Rebbe, and many, many Jews around the world who know nothing about him, that, we want to share the Rebbe with the world. So the 20 years was, I think, such a huge motivating factor. And the Rebbe himself would often speak about, these great anniversaries, 10 years, 20 years, and their significance. So we want to keep the candle burning and carry on the fantastic work of Chabad until the coming of Mashiach. Yes?
First, I want to thank you for writing a book that to me is unputdownable.
Thank you.
It's a brilliant work of scholarship, and it's really a pleasure to read and a privilege. But I have many questions, but one question that, just personally speaking regarding the Rebbe, that after the Rebbitzin passed away, I understand that he left the house and moved into his office. With whom did he eat a Shabbos meal, a Yontif meal?
I believe he ate on his own.
Oh.
Yeah. He was offered, everyone would have been happy to join the Rebbe. But it's interesting, you know, some Hasidic movements, the Rebbe spends Shabbos and he has Tish with a lot of his followers. In Chabad it was never like that. The Rebbe always spent Shabbos with his wife, and they didn't really have guests, or a lot of guests. And I think that was special to him. His wife was the only person who was his friend, and who he could speak to on that level. She wasn't his chassid or disciple, she was his friend. And I think, you know, those who were close to him know how dearly he missed his wife. And even though it might seem strange he wanted to be on his own, it was just probably a continuation of, you know, if he could be with his wife, then he's just going to be on his own. And probably his thoughts of her.
You are as brilliant a speaker as you are a writer.
Thank you. Yes?
So we see that the Rebbe's most successful work was done later on in his life, and yet I see the cover is a picture of his young life.
Okay, the question is, if his most successful work is done later on in his life, why is the cover a picture of him in his younger life? I think that the Rebbe's, one of the most remarkable qualities of the Rebbe is the consistency that he showed throughout his entire life. People say, what did he do at the end of his life to prepare the movement for after his passing? He spent 40 years preparing us, giving us teachings, giving us message. And the movement has flourished and survived because of those 40 years of teachings. His early life, when you read the story of his life, there's a remarkable consistency between the early part of his life and the latter part of his life. Not in activity. He had no public role. He actually wrote that he shied away from communal work. But in terms of his vision, how he saw Torah as truth, and how he dreamed that the world would one day come to be aligned with the Torah. When he was 5 years old and he went to Cheder, he later wrote in a letter that even then he was dreaming of Mashiach, and he was dreaming of the time when Jews wouldn't suffer anymore, and the world, the truth of the world, would be the same as the truth of the Torah. So that was really the vision of his whole life. I chose that picture because I think it sums up that message. Here is a young man, he was in university, he was studying physics, but it was the same Rebbe, it was the same vision. It was that he was going to mikveh every day, and he was writing notes on Chassidus. So he never really deviated, I think, his whole life. He had this remarkable consistency, which actually makes it hard to, on a biographical level. I actually, you know, when I was discussing with secular publishers and mainstream outlets about the Rebbe's life, they would say, well, you know, he didn't have a spiritual crisis, there's no real story here, he's religious his whole life. But that's inspiring. For us, that's inspiring. And so I think that the picture conveys it wonderfully. Yes?
You mentioned that the Rebbe kept most of his personal feelings and emotions to himself.
Yes.
But yet in the early years when he did interact, I would assume, with others, is there a glimpse of that? Did others have any insight as to what was the Rebbe's feelings and thoughts and emotions during those times, besides the correspondence with his father?
Not a lot. There are some interviews. Unfortunately, the most wonderful work that we have of the history of the Rebbe's life really started in 2005. There's an organization that just prepared this wonderful video we just watched called Jewish Educational Media. And they've been interviewing hundreds and hundreds, I think almost 1,000 interviews with people who met the Rebbe or were in touch with him. And they did a series on the Rebbe's early life. But unfortunately, not a lot of people alive to interview children of people who have memories or they remember from their parents. So you have to realize that Chabad is not that interested in history. We're interested in bringing mitzvahs to Jews and making the world a better place and not dwelling on the past. There was never a huge movement. Even in the Rebbe's lifetime, there was not this huge interest in history and the past. It's just that now, as we approach 20 years, it seems that there's a lot of feelings that we'd like to know more about them and more details, but we don't have that much from the Rebbe's early life.
Rabbi, in the early years,
Yes.
the Rebbe did request people to document the history of Chassidim, of Chabad.
Yes.
Back letters.
Yes.
The Sefer
Yes.
HaToldos.
Yeah, not about himself, yes.
No, but in general.
Yeah, no, there is, yes. No, in terms of preserving Hasidic history, yes. I stand corrected. There is that tremendous interest in preserving, yes.
Was there anything specific that you thought should be included in the book that you left out, or was edited, anything extra?
The main thing which was edited out, really, if you want to put it that way, was I wrote a lot about the previous Rebbe as well. Because the Rebbe was so profoundly influenced by his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. And a lot of that didn't make it into the book because my editors felt that we should stay focused on the Rebbe's persona. But the previous Rebbe was a fantastic, fascinating personality. Someone should really write a biography about his life. But I tried to stay focused on the Rebbe's life for that.
Maybe volume 2.
Huh? Volume 2. Okay, let's take one more question and then we'll do a book signing. Yes?
Was the Rebbe directly connected to the previous Rebbe besides being his father-in-law?
Yes, he was a distant cousin. He was a Schneerson. They both share the same name. The Rebbe was descended from the Rebbe was the 7th Rebbe of Lubavitch, and he was descended from the 3rd Rebbe of Lubavitch, whose name he bore. He was also Menachem Mendel Schneerson. He was also known as Tzemach Tzedek, because he wrote a halachic treatise called Tzemach Tzedek. So his great, a few generations back, he was also descended from a Chabad Rebbe. But they spelled the name slightly differently in English. The Rebbe spelled it without an H, Schneerson, and the previous Rebbe spelled it with an H. So a hint to the difference. Okay, what a strange point to end on. Thank you very much.